July 5, 2013, at about 10:50 p.m., an MMA train carrying petroleum crude oil in 72 Class 111 tank cars arrived at Nantes, Quebec. In keeping with the railway's practice, the locomotive engineer parked the train for the night on a descending grade on the main track. After shutting down 4 of the 5 locomotives, the engineer applied 7 handbrakes. Railway rules require that handbrakes alone must be capable of holding a train, and this must be verified by a test. That night, however, the locomotive air brakes were left on during the test, meaning the train was being held by a combination of handbrakes and air brakes. It also gave the false impression that the handbrakes alone were enough. The engineer then contacted 2 rail traffic controllers, one in Farnham, Quebec, to let him know the train was secure, and the other in Bangor, Maine, to discuss the smoking lead locomotive and the problems it might cause for the next crew. As the smoke was expected to settle, it was agreed to leave the train as it was and deal with it the next morning. Shortly after the engineer left for the night, the Nantes Fire Department responded to a 911 call of a fire on the train. Firefighters extinguished the blaze on the lead locomotive by shutting off the fuel. Then, following railway instructions, they turned off the electrical breakers. After discussing the situation with the rail traffic controller in Farnham and an MMA employee who had been dispatched to the scene, everyone departed. With all the locomotives shut down, the air brake system began to lose pressure, and the brakes gradually became less and less effective. About an hour later, just before 1 a.m., the air pressure dropped to a point where the combination of air brakes and handbrakes could no longer hold the train. The train then began to roll downhill toward Lac-Mégantic, 7 miles away.
For driving the next generation of safety, and it consists of 3 pillars. First is continuing strong oversight and enforcement that is data-driven. Second is advancing more proactive safety-based programs that identify and eliminate risk well in advance of an accident. And third is ensuring predictable and reliable federal funding for rail in order to improve infrastructure through capital investments and to develop new safety technologies through robust research and development.
Addressing the issue of fatigue could drastically improve safety in the railroad industry. The majority of our locomotive engineers and conductors in freight service work on call 24/7, 365 days a year, and receive as little as an hour and a half notice before they have to go to work for a 12-hour shift.
We have trained 20,000 emergency responders last year alone, an additional 2,000 out at an emergency response training center, sort of a graduate course for emergency response, if you will, at our center in Pueblo, Colorado. Each of our members actually has a training train that goes around and stops in different communities and gives a little bit more in-depth training, but it is certainly our goal to make sure that every emergency responder knows in advance what is coming through and what the appropriate response is, hopefully getting around to giving them hands-on training as well. In the area, of course, of prevention, we are doing increased inspections of rail. We're putting roadside detectors out so that when a train goes by, we can actually detect acoustically if there's a bearing defect. We also have laser beam readers to try to see cracks in the wheel before the wheel splits apart. And obviously maintaining the track and maintaining the bridges is high on the agenda as well.
But if you get a catastrophic derailment on that bridge, you shut down the Mississippi River, you'll find out how quickly the economic numbers will go out the roof, as that's the major grain port and things being shipped. So I'll leave it to the experts to, how does it work in terms of coming together, and how do we address that piece of it, that this is an infrastructure deficiency that is just waiting for an accident to happen, as my mayor said?
Could you explain why the NTSB has determined that the current tank card, the DOT 111, is not suitable for the transport of crude oil.
When you're moving crude oil, you're talking about a much greater risk. In particular, when we're seeing unit trains, we're talking about 100 tank cars in a single train, and that really does compound risk.
That we're seeing an exponential increase in the movement of crude oil by rail, 25% since January 2012, and 37 times the amount of crude oil by rail that we saw since 2005. With that kind of capacity coming onto the system, it is going to have other impacts.
You know, we could condone the existing new design and say if you buy that, you can use it for the next 30 years. We could look at what NTSB has proposed as a design and put that out there. We could have some certainty. Right now, there's so much uncertainty. People aren't going to make the investments in safer cars.
In Paulsboro, to be very specifically New Jersey, in 2012, we had a train derailment that released 20,000 gallons, not of the Bakken crude, but of chemicals, causing an immediate emergency evacuation all along that area and affected the long-term health and has had long-term health and environmental impacts. And so what the incident does for me is just underscores the importance of addressing the movement of hazardous materials by rail, not just the Bakken crude.
Technology, real-time data about what's happening on the rails. You're absolutely right. We have to know when we have a track problem so that we can prevent it. We know that there's some technologies that can be deployed